Jose James, thank you for joining me at Cultural Attaché so we could talk about your upcoming show, which is the end of your summer tour at the Ford in Los Angeles this Saturday. And I'm wondering, what does this music that you're performing mean to you now that is perhaps different than what it meant to you when you first recorded it or when you first started playing it live?
That's a great question. Happy to be here. This is great. And nobody's asked me that, and I've been waiting for somebody to ask me that because that's a real deep question. I think I first kind of approached it from what it meant to me in terms of my generation. To me, Erykah Badu is kind of like the Joni Mitchell of my generation. She changed the game with her songwriting, with her musicality, with her presentation, with the way that she effortlessly blended all these genres. So I think I first made the album and thought about the concept of the project in terms of like wanting to respect what she had created and find a way in. And now that, like you said, I've been performing it for quite a while and all around the world, the songs have sort of become mine. There's this beautiful moment where the ownership transfers to the performer. That happened with the Bill Withers project too. And you start putting your own thoughts and feelings and emotions into these songs. And then it really becomes like a deeply powerful and a way to sort of like, yeah, bring a piece of yourself to these songs that are so familiar to all of us in a new way. And the jazz part too, because we've been kind of taking them different directions every night. So now what you have is this like deeply personal and deeply creative world that exists alongside Badu's world.
Well, it's interesting, and All About Jazz in April did a story on you, which you obviously know about. And in the opening paragraphs, they talked about how you mentioned that, of course, that Joni Mitchell was that Badu was the Joni Mitchell of her generation. But they also went on to say a woman who has constructed a world of her own in order to tell her own alternative story, which I thought was really interesting.
Mm.
So my question for you is, what is the story you want to tell, whether it is an alternative one or not, about yourself through her music?
I think it's really about sort of, can a jazz singer do something else? And I'm certainly not the first one to try. But historically, the instrumentalists who sort of sing, like Dizzy Gillespie comes to mind, they've sort of been able to take more risks with like weird stuff, fun stuff, commercial stuff. I was listening to some of like Dizzy's stuff in the 50s, that's just so weird, and he's not self-conscious at all. And I kind of miss that. I think there's a degree of sort of like deep seriousness these days around what jazz singers can do. And I kind of thought, why not? Why is hip hop and R&B sort of like this impenetrable place that jazz singers can't go? So to me, it's really about sort of like breaking new ground. I'm always excited when it's something that nobody's really done before, because it feels fresh and it feels like, oh, there's a discovery here. And the best thing I've heard from people who are like Badu fans who had no idea who I was like, wow, I've lived with these songs my whole life, but like you were able to sort of present them in a way where they became, I saw it from a new angle, and I think that's the real kind of gift of art, is to look at something we see every day, like Andy Warhol with the Campbell soup can, and to turn our heads around just slightly. So we're like, oh, I've now seen this thing that I've looked at 1,000 times in a completely different way. I think that's the most powerful thing we can do as artists.
As you're saying that, I think about the work that I do sometimes as a photographer, and I realize that we spend so much time looking forward that there's a whole lot of stuff that we miss by not looking behind us too.
Mm, that is so true.
And I had the fun task, this weekend. I played Erykah Badu's song and then your version, and just played them both as companion pieces. And it's funny, I don't think of it as a huge leap what you've done. I think what you've done is terrific, but it's like this makes complete sense to me. Am I crazy?
No, it's not a huge leap, but we didn't like really, kind of in the same way with the Bill Withers tribute, we didn't like completely take apart her stuff and make it atonal or something. And that's kind of like part of the history of jazz singers too. Like when Ella did her celebrated songbook series, she sang the melody, she sang the songs. Um, but it's the way that she did it with the phrasing and the rhythm and the inflection and her history that's made it jazz to me. Yeah, some of the songs I didn't really change one note of the melody, but in order for me to get inside of her phrasing and to make it my own, that to me is the sort of crooner element of what jazz singing is all about, really.
Right, but I think what I was referring to mostly was the fact that I heard a lot of jazz in what she was doing.
Oh yeah,
That's
yeah.
that's the thing, because I remember hearing the music when it first came out, and then
Mhm.
I'm listening to it now and I'm going, God, there is a huge amount of jazz in this that I don't think I was cognizant of when I first was listening to it.
That is so true. Yeah, I mean, especially on her first two albums. I mean, there's like upright bass on there, you know, like the apple tree and all these kind of like it sounds like she's performing with the jazz trio, basically, you know, which is so cool.
Right. Now you mentioned male crooners. I know that you're a huge fan of Johnny Hartman and John Coltrane's collaboration. I think you've said that's the best male jazz vocalist album. I read an interview that Hartman did with the New York Times in 1982. And he said, the more you sing a song, you are apt to change it. It reflects the moods that you're in.
Mm.
Do you share that opinion about the many songs that you've recorded, whether they're your own or somebody else's over the course of your career?
I do. I think the most recorded song that I've done is of standard is Tenderly. And I recorded on For All We Know on Verve. I recorded it on my Billie Holiday tribute, Yesterday I Had the Blues, on Blue Note, and I've just recorded it on Ben Wendell's album. That one's actually fascinating because I just did the acapella vocal and he orchestrated 40 pieces around that he played everything. And a song like that, I mean, I think of those songs as sort of like jazz's Shakespeare, where it's like this is the classical repertoire. And as you mature, hopefully, and deepen, hopefully, and go through some life experiences, then all of a sudden the words and the text become more relevant to you. And you sort of say, okay, wow, like, you know, because definitely when I first sang it, you know, this idea of like, you know, being touched either physically or emotionally by this other person and kind of reminiscing about that moment, the times was much closer. But now that I'm 45, it's like, oh, I can really think of a lot of ways and a lot of different ways. For example, like a mentor who opened my world to jazz or to poetry or art. Kind of changes the feeling of it for me, even though it's ostensibly a romantic song, but at least in my mind, yeah, it's turned into like something else, which I hope comes across in the interpretation.
Yeah, I had the privilege of speaking to Betty Levent a couple times. And one of the things she told me was that she doesn't think she'll ever get lush life right. She'll spend her whole life trying. And
That's
I
right.
think that's the same thing. It's all your life experiences and who you are is going to constantly inform how you approach material.
I'm glad she said that because I feel the same way. I don't think I've ever performed it correctly, either musically or emotionally. It's really, and he wrote it when he was 17, which is just mind blowing. Yeah,
You've heard his version of it.
I have. I love. That's my favorite one.
It's
Yeah.
completely different than any other version you've heard. There is a pep to it that I was surprised by.
Right. Yeah. He's just kind of like, and the piano under it, it goes so much faster than kind of the serious, normal way we've come to understand it.
Right. One of the things I admire about your career is that your passion for various artists, it runs the gamut. It's not exclusively crooners, it's not exclusively jazz. It's sort of all over the place. And I know that sometimes your fan base can sometimes not understand the choices that you're making, or critics might not understand the choices you're making. But why should an artist have just a narrow range of interest
Hmm.
and a way of expressing his or herself? What? Because we all have a wide array of interests that we have. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that, and if it frustrates you that people seem to want you to be one thing because that's easiest for them?
Hmm. I think it has been frustrating in the past. I think I've sort of made peace and found like my happy medium with how much I need to explore and how much, sort of we exist in service to people. That was a big shift in the pandemic for me. It was like a lot of time to think about why I do it and when I would hopefully come back to jazz singing and performing. Would I do anything differently? And I think the shift for me was like, well, I think I've sort of artistically pushed the boundaries as far as I want to. And so I understand there's the circle, the Venn diagram of Jose James, And now my challenge is how creative can I be within sort of like the parameters that my fans enjoy, because I've definitely pushed it at some points past what my fans enjoy, either for the hip hop kids who are like, why are you doing a duo with a jazz pianist? Or for the jazz purists who are like, you're doing trap drums with the, auto tune. No. And so I've kind of found this like beautiful space in the middle, um, which I love, and I think part of getting older is sort of finding like what you do best and figuring out how to explore that infinitely.
Well, I read an interview that you did in 2012 with the Min Post, where you said, if I could do jazz the way I wanted to, I would, but I just can't. I
Mm.
can't do it with the freedom I want or the audience development I want.
Yeah.
Along with your own perspective that you just expressed changing, has anything else changed for you in the 11 years since that comment that makes that less true today?
No, I think it's really true. Yeah, and it's sort of like the lesson every long-term artist figures out. It's like, you know, if you kind of do the same thing again and again and again, whether that's your choice or not, like I'm thinking of like Diana Krall, for example, becomes harder to make a change. Like when she tried to do The Girl in the Other Room, which I thought was a very courageous and cool. Her fans were like, no, we don't want that from you. It was a resounding no. Um, and I was like, okay, that's interesting, like because if you it's kind of a double-edged sword, like you can become known for one thing and become popular for that and it's sort of a dependable brand like Coca-Cola or something. But you may not necessarily grow in the way you want to. So I think what's changed is just kind of like seeing people who have done both, um, and not and talking to some of them, not Diana Krall, but other singers in jazz, and kind of hearing the frustration of some people feel like they're in like golden handcuffs and they can't, write songs or do anything or produce that they want to. And then other people who have like spent their whole career throwing paint against the wall, but now want to sort of hit this commercial high and they're not able to because they're all over the map. So I think it's just kind of like to answer your actual question, being at peace with your choice, no matter what the result is. That's the challenge.
Well, have you been able to, in those years, have you been able to sing jazz the way you want to?
I have, and I've been really lucky to be a guest with some of the greatest, like McCoy Tyner or Christian McBride, either his smaller band or his big band. And sort of in those moments, it's like, oh, this is my training. I can really flex here. And what I've realized really about myself is that I want to do all of it, and I'm very grateful to have that chance. It's kind of like an actor being able to do like some Broadway, some, theater, some movies, and some TV in their whole career, which is tough. But I've been able to sort of do all of that musically.
Well, and McCoy Tyner, if I read correctly, gave you great advice to just be yourself when you were touring with him, doing the Johnny Hartman stuff. And I think it was the first time that he had a singer with his band. But knowing how much Coltrane means to you and how much McCoy Tyner means to you, which was more important, the advice or the man who was giving it to you?
Well, certainly the advice coming from him had a lot more weight, you know. The thing about McCoy, which I found with a lot of sort of like living legends across genres, is that they are never looking backwards. Like McCoy was never telling people how to play. Um, he was always positive. He was always uplifting, and he really was like in service to the music, to the audience, and to his musicians. Never met another musician who was more generous with compliments or energy on stage. You learn a lot by sharing the stage with somebody, and he was just so powerful and spiritual and giving. And he would finish every show and say, you know, thank you to us. And we were like, what? Like, thank you. You're McCoy Tyner. Like, but he was like, no, I really appreciate everything you guys gave us, which I've tried to bring to my own band leading in my own way.
Yeah, and I guess the band that you're going to have with you on Saturday is the only time you'll have the full studio band with you, right?
That's right.
So that's going to be a reunion for you. It's not just for the audience. What do you think that's going to bring to this particular show that'll be unique?
I think it's going to be so cool because it's kind of like the Avengers of jazz. You know what I mean? Ben Williams, who recently moved here from New York, he's been on most of my albums on bass, and he is to me just like the greatest of his generation. He brings a certain language because he's very much of the hip hop generation, like myself, but also super deep into jazz with Pat Metheny and Herbie. So just having him in the band, just already know is going to take it to the next level. Jarris Yoakley, who was my greatest discovery on drums, he has grown like tremendously. I mean, he sounds like if Tony Williams grew up listening to Jay Dilla, that's him. I mean, it's just, and he's just become better and better and better every night. It's really scary now. You never know what he's going to do. Big Yuki on keys is really kind of like a future legend. Like he's really, besides Robert Glasper, the link between hip hop and jazz in his work with the Tribe Called Quest and Q-Tip and Busta Rhymes and people like that. And turns with Antonio Sanchez too on the other side. And then Evan Dorsey, who is 19, is playing alto saxophone, and she's been discovered by Kamasi and Terrace Martin, and she's just like a true once in a generation talent. Like I feel like night after night watching her grow, it's like playing with a young Charlie Parker or a young Coltrane. She's really that talented, and it's going to be a night to remember for sure.
Very cool. Now, there's a long tradition of jazz vocalists singing the popular songs of their time, in addition to the Great American Songbook. Now that you've tackled Bill Withers, you've tackled Billie Holiday, who was singing the songs of her time, and now Erykah Badu, who was creating the songs of our time. Are there other singer songwriters whose work means as much to you as they do that we might see you record them in the future?
There are, and some of my friends and my label have been kind of joking that it's been all bees so far, you know. And the next one, if I do it, would also be a bee, which would be Beck. You know, he's somebody who I've really, really admired for his courage through the years. I think his songwriting catalog is like impossibly deep. I almost think he's underrated as a songwriter because he's so kind of like mutable, and you know, he's had all these sort of different kind of hits over his career. But if you think about, you know, from his first album to, you know, Sea Change or, you know, Morning Phase, these kind of like sweeping, almost country singer-songwriter records, he's really got a lot in there. So I think if I did something next, it would be the music of Beck with an orchestra. I think that would be like stunning. I'd also love to meet him too.
Like what?
I'd also love to meet him too now that I'm in LA. Yeah.
Yeah, I interviewed him once because I worked on the project Moulin Rouge, and he did Diamond Dogs for that. So I interviewed him and Timbaland together. It was pretty amazing.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
So one last question for you, Jose. If you could go back in time to when you were in an a cappella group called Cerulean and give yourself some advice that you think that I think you were 16, that 16-year-old really needed to hear to help him navigate his way through the life and career that you've had, what would that be?
Well, I can't believe that you found out about cerulean, but I love that. You know, I think I would just tell him that everything that you believe about music and yourself right now is absolutely true. And no matter what comes and goes, um, you don't have to worry about anything, you know? Because, and the cliche thing is true. It's like the highs and the lows can knock you down. I remember when I was doing Letterman and Conan and all this stuff, it was a bit too overwhelming for me. I wasn't really ready for it, you know? And obviously the downs, you know, I haven't sung in 2 years because of COVID. I wasn't ready for that either. So it's like in both of those times, I definitely did tap into how I felt about music back then because, you know, sometimes just putting on your favorite album and remembering, oh yeah, this is why I do it is like the most important thing.
Absolutely. Well, that's the beauty of music. It gets us all through the best and the worst moments of our lives.
Thankfully.
True that. Thank you for your time, particularly on such short notice. And, you know, have a great last show this weekend.
Thank you so much. This was awesome. It was great meeting you.
Likewise. All right. Have a good rest of your day, Jose.
Take care.
Bye.